The New York Jets will take on the Carolina Panthers in a little less than 90 minutes for their second preseason contest of the year. There are 32 players on the New York Jets roster who will be inactive. Who better to bring on to preview the game than Mr. Brandyn Pokrass of New York Jets X Factor? Let's roll.
Jets, Jets, let's go.
Jets wide receiver Wesley Walker. Wesley, how you doing today? ESPN writer Mr. Rich Cimini, Jets reporter for The Athletic, Mr. Zach Rosenblatt, Hall of Famer and Jets legend Mr. Marty Lyons.
Your host, Connor Law.
Welcome in, everyone. Here we are. It is a Saturday evening edition of NY Flight Jets Talk, and actually the first ever pregame show, really, in NY Flight Jets Talk history. The New York Jets will take on the Carolina Panthers in a little less than 90 minutes at Bank of America Stadium in Charlotte, North Carolina. The New York Jets won their first preseason contest against the Washington Commanders 20-17. They have 32 players on their 90-man roster who will be inactive for today's contest. But let's bring on our guest, Mr. Brandyn Pokrass, New York Jets X Factor. Brandyn, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Very, very interested and very.
Yes.
I'm anticipating tonight's game, to put it lightly.
Yeah, absolutely. And, obviously it's just a lot of Jet fans are just excited to have football, coming their way. Second preseason contest of the year. The Jets will have their third contest next Saturday against the New York Giants. But there are definitely a lot of storylines going into today's matchup as the Jets just had their joint practice against the Commanders. Like I said, 32 players inactive. A lot of which stand out. Some being named Lakai Fotu, Solomon Thomas, Javon Kinlaw, and with that being said, there are question marks regarding who will be playing alongside Quinnen Williams in 2024. Obviously, you see these undrafted free agents, Eric Watts, Brandyn McGregor. What do you think it means for those two guys, especially given that you have players like Kinlaw, Fotu, and Thomas all inactive for today's matchup?
I mean, the preseason's all about opportunity, right? It's about what can you do with the reps in practices, in joint practices, in preseason games. And, the Jets are, if you look at who's playing, taking that approach. There aren't really many starters or guys that are considered main starter backups. So, for example, the Lecky Fotu. He might not be on that quote-unquote main line of the defense, but the Jets are probably looking at him as the team's main run stopper for this season. Jamien Sherwood. He may not technically be in the top two of the linebackers, but he is, from what he's shown in camp, really established himself as someone that is going to be relied on in this defense to an extent this year. The guys that are active, right? Look at the Will McDonald and Michael Clemens. Clemens, some people think, could be in danger of his roster spot. I think personally, he isn't necessarily going to lose it because of what he's done on run defense, but that could change based on what you see from a Leonard Taylor, an Eric Watts, a Brandyn McGregor. If those guys are showing run defense plus a higher pass rush ceiling than a Clemens, then that's where you get some of those answers. Will McDonald, what can he show in his work tonight? And then you flip to the secondary, Jarek Bernard-Converse, Quantez Stiggers. Can they continue what they've shown in camp into the games on the offensive side of the ball? I think the biggest one could be Olu Fashanu at right tackle. Is he ready, maybe not even just to be a backup, but does he look good enough to maybe even start or push the start? Because he has already shown that he's a natural pass protector on either side, and getting those game reps are very important. Braylon Allen, Isaiah Davis, even if you work a little bit down the roster, a guy like Lance McCutcheon, who Aaron Rodgers called out in his media availability as someone that's impressed, can he make some plays tonight? Can a guy like Brandon Smith again make some plays? Can Izzy Abanikanda make an impact? How do the quarterback threes look? It's those types of guys. And I understand that like a normal football fan might not be as interested in, how does the quarterback 3 and 4 look? How does the wide receiver 5 and 6 battle? I get that, right? It's not for the more casual audience. But for those that really follow this team and really are interested, with the way Jets have been injured, these are the types of players that have been on the field in the past, the offensive linemen, the receivers. So these roster battles aren't insignificant. They will have a significance going forward. Will it be the biggest of significance? I hope not, but it's going to be really interesting to see how deep this roster actually is and who's going to win these types of battles.
Yeah, you mentioned, the quarterback battle there, between 3 and 4, most notably Steven Martinez and Andrew Peasley are fighting for that job as Jordan Travis has been placed on the non-football injury list. With that being said, Brian Costello of the New York Post tweeted out, not too long ago that it has been announced that Tyrod Taylor will be an emergency quarterback. He will not be, in line to take a significant amount of snaps tonight. With that being said, Andrew Peasley will get the starting nod for the Jets tonight, and then it's expected that Martinez and Peasley basically will each get a half to, really prove themselves. Martinez had a very strong first preseason game. He's become a fan favorite just from that first preseason game from those who watched. He was the Jets' leading passer as he went 6 for 10 with 104 yards. What do you think it means for these two guys to really prove themselves with a player like Travis, with the possibility of him not even suiting up for a game this year?
I think you just have to see what they can build off of, right? You're not going to, from these games, be like, oh, Peasley's the second coming and the guy that the Jets go to after Aaron Rodgers, or the same thing for Martinez. Just not going to happen. What you want to see, though, is, okay, how did they operate the offense? How did they go through their progressions? How are they scanning the field when they face pressure? Are they able to evade it and move around the pocket like these guys have shown? I know it's a point that a lot of people rolled their eyes at, but when Saul would talk about last year about building off practices, it's the same thing in a game. How do you go from that first preseason performance with Peasley? How do you build off that Jason Brownlee touchdown pass with Martinez? How do you build off of those two drives that helped the Jets win the game? And I think that type of progress, and plus whatever adversity they face and how they overcome it, that's the important thing when you're looking at it, because you're not going to see the exotic defenses. You're not going to see everything that a defensive coordinator can throw at a quarterback in a preseason game. It's a lot of vanilla defenses. It's a lot of, straight cover 2, straight cover 3, straight man, not a lot of disguise stuff. So you're really not getting the biggest possible read, but you're getting enough of a read for that baseline talent of, can these guys be the practice squad quarterback 3?
Absolutely. You mentioned you're kind of, trying to earn a spot on the practice squad, not necessarily fill the shoes of Aaron Rodgers. Like you mentioned, that's kind of, hard to do. Kind of similar at the running back position there. Obviously, you have Breece Hall, who's the leader of the pack, but someone who's been constantly fighting for a roster spot. The Jets selected him in last year's NFL draft. Didn't really see the field a ton in his rookie season, and that's Israel Abanikanda. He did have a touchdown in the Jets' first preseason game. How important do you think these games are for him? As he, if the Jets were to carry 4 running backs, it's really talks between him and Valladay. But I personally don't think the Jets will carry 4 running backs, and I personally think at best Abanikanda is a practice squad guy. What do you think these games mean for a player like Abanikanda, who's on the bubble of making the roster?
They're very important, and I think whether it's practice, the joint practice, or the game, he needs every single rep to stand out.
Yes.
He needs every single play. He needs to make as big of an impact in every aspect of the game to stand out. Because when you've reached this point, it's not a guarantee that the Jets are going to keep 4 running backs. They could, but it's not a guarantee. Izzy could be competing against other spots on the roster. He could be competing against other wideouts. He could be competing against other linebackers, other safeties, other defensive linemen. So it goes into all of that where you need a run like he had last year against the Panthers, where he had that sick juke move and almost got into the end zone. You need a big special teams play from him. You need him making impacts where the coaching staff looks at him and says, okay, maybe he isn't the best fit in our scheme, but he now has developed to the point where he's running hard and he's more decisive. He's pass blocking, which he has shown a bit of improvement in. And If he adds that special team element to it, now you're looking at a player that can actually contribute while not taking up a roster spot that could be used for someone else that could contribute better, right? If you have the speed and the potential of Izzy, and now he's making an impact on special teams or in some other way, now he's more valuable. It's all about, I think, for Izzy, making plays when he gets the ball on offense and just establishing as much value for himself as possible.
Yes, yeah. Izzy had 6 rushing attempts last game for 17 yards. He did record a receiving touchdown as well. You mentioned safety there, defensive line, the possibility of, using another roster spot there. Someone who was a safety but recently converted to cornerback, who had a very strong first preseason game, is the LSU product, Jarek Bernard. Converse, obviously, with the conversion of safety to cornerback, that's definitely a big thing. And the Jets have a pretty packed cornerback room. If you think about it, you have the big three, and then you have Quantez, Stiggers, and Brandyn Eccles. JBC having a really strong preseason game for first preseason game. How do you think he kind of piggybacks on that, through the next 2 games to really prove why maybe the Jets should carry 5 cornerbacks, with him being one of them?
I think he just has to build, like I said with some other players, right? He just has to build on what he's shown so far. Dating back to OTAs, he's impressed in my eyes, right? He has some nice coverage. He looks like he's able to run side by side with receivers and make nice plays and have the movement ability to get all over. I think he just needs to build off what he's shown. He had a really good performance last week. How can he build off that? Can he, instead of letting up that big pass where he had great coverage, can he deflect that pass? Can he contribute even more as a tackler? Can he just repeatedly do what he's done in terms of coverage, in terms of tackling, in terms of just being an overall player? Because this is a position that I feel like is underrated, not necessarily this year, but in terms of the future. Whether people want to admit it or not, it's not a guarantee that DJ Reed and Michael Carter are Jets next season. These are 2 players that will need new contracts. If JBC keeps showing out the way he has, the Jets might see this developmental guy as someone that might take the spot of a Reed or Carter. So it's just important that he builds off it. And that's all you can ask for guys in the preseason. You can't ask them to do more than they can, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the possibility of DJ Reed and Michael Carter not good with their contracts expiring, the possibility of them not being Jets next season. That's obviously a storyline this season. Get these extensions done. Personally, I believe they will re-sign one of those 2 players. But with that being said, and the Jets possibly wanting to use JBC as a developmental piece, could you see the Jets, carrying maybe 5 cornerbacks to get that? Excuse me, 6 possibly on the active roster to get that done. But as they kind of did last year, because JBC was injured, but the Jets really wanted to make sure no other team got him. What do you think JBC's role really looks like? Is it a practice squad guy, or is it a spot on the 53 man?
I mean, I don't see how he wouldn't make the 53 man with the way he's been playing and like everything we talked about, right? Like that's with what he's shown in the preseason. That's not a guy you just let another team try to pick up. No, that's a guy you keep on the roster. And maybe he's not active, but he's run as one of the main backups on defense, right? He's been involved at times covering Garrett Wilson, covering some of the bigger receivers on the Jets. And between him and Stiggers, those might be your 2 guys that you rely on in the coming years, right? So that's not a guy you try to stash on your practice squad. That's not a guy you try to get rid of. No, he has a spot, in my eyes, on the 53 man.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned, just one more thing before we get to the phone line. Speaking of cornerbacks, Brandon Codrington was returning kicks last game, both kicks and punts. Obviously there's some talk with Irv Charles, the possibility of him being the Jets gunner after Justin Hardy parted ways with the New York Jets. Are you okay with the Jets using an extra roster spot on a guy like Codrington if he was just to contribute on special teams and he continues to impress at both kick and punt returner?
I'll say context matters because it depends who he's being kept over, right? It's so easy for people to say, oh, can we keep this guy as a returner? Okay, who are you keeping him over? Who are you keeping that extra player at that position over? Are you keeping him over an extra lineman, an extra receiver, an extra running back? Is those types of decisions that, you can't give the full picture until you know the full picture. And, just from the vantage point I am now, I don't really see the need of keeping a guy just to be a returner. I mean, you have Xavier Gipson, who can contribute as a receiver and on special teams. You have Malachi Corley. You have Isaiah Davis, who has shown some, at least in my opinion, impressive burst as a kick returner and a little bit as a punt returner. So when you have those guys that can fill both an offensive or defensive role and a special teams role, why would you now try to get rid of a roster spot for a guy that's just simply a returner? And hey, maybe Codrington is a talented corner. Maybe he does show a lot in tonight's preseason game on special teams or as a cornerback, and that changes my mind a little bit, but I just don't see the necessity or the reason to do that, because at the end of the day, you want to keep the best 53. And I'm not cutting someone that might be a better depth piece just so I can have a pure returner on the team.
Everyone smash that like button. Make sure you are subscribed. We are currently at 954 subscribers. That is, we are knocking on the door of 1,000 subscribers. If we do hit 1,000 subscribers before week 1 of the NFL season, I will be giving away a Joe Klecko signed photo to one lucky subscriber. So make sure you are subscribed. But let's go over to the hotline. First up, we have Nick T joining the show. Nick, how you doing?
What's up, guys? How you guys doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Getting pumped for the game here.
Mm-hmm.
So, a couple things that you guys are talking about with the corner situation. So, Bernard Converse, watching him last week live, he's good. I like what he showed. I don't know how much of it, I haven't gone back and looked specifically, like, how much of it was he covering a legitimate starting receiver? Legitimate, when I say legitimate NFL starting receiver, per se. But when you're looking at the fourth corner position, he looked pretty good. And so, Brandon, to your point, they'll probably carry 5 defensive corners, specifically corners, right? But here's the thing that you guys didn't talk about is, I don't know if he's injured or not or what the deal is. Isaiah Oliver, from what I remember, is a special team contributor.
He is, yes. But Brandon, take it away there.
I mean, Oliver got moved to safety. JBC got moved to corner. So they kind of flip-flop with that. So I'd be more considering Oliver with, how does he stack up with like a Jalen Key, for example, because the Jets are going to carry Ashton Davis. They're going to carry Chuck Clark. They're going to carry Tony Adams. So it's more of like an Oliver versus Key and that type of battle where I think cornerback, JBC, he was going against the Washington ones and he had some great coverage and they kept testing him and he kept making plays. And I think to an extent, right, you can only play against who you play against. And the fact that he's making plays is significant enough. You can't ask him to do something that he isn't going to physically be able to do in that game. And also with his standing on the team, with the Jets having Sauce Gardner, with them having DJ Reed and Michael Carter, you're not asking JBC to be your starter right off the bat. So I think it's in that different lens where I think he really is sealing his roster spot. And I think if he has another great performance, I think even more so. But the Oliver question, I think that's more of how do you look at him in terms of the other safeties on the roster? And, he hasn't done much to really stand out for me just yet.
See, Connor, I don't know if you want to address it before I rebut.
It's definitely interesting. I think it definitely helps JBC's odds of making the roster now that he has officially moved to safety, just given the competition at that spot. Yeah, but yes, Oliver did take some snaps at gunner these past 2 seasons.
I just think, to me, so when you look at the history of the NFL, like even like guys like Revis, like late in their career, they transition from corner to safety. So his position, whatever Oliver is diagnosed as right now, I don't care. I think when you're looking at the bottom 3 spots in the roster, whoever can play the gunner position and special teams the most will have value. Like, as much as I think Irv Charles is garbage as a wide receiver, as a gunner, he has value. So he might make the team just off that. And that's where, and to the same extent, you were talking earlier about return game, and I forget the guy's name offhand, who I agree with you is not making the roster. But like, the thing
Codrington?
is, yes, coming, yeah. And there's some nuance to that too, because not all the starters are playing in the preseason, and that trickles down to every other level of the team, including special teams. So some of these guys that are playing on and contributing on special teams, blocking and doing the nuances that would make a Corley or whoever look good, aren't necessarily in those positions, right now. So they're building out certain rosters. You have to have that versatility. If you're on the bubble in that 45 to 53 man, and that's a group of probably 20 guys potentially, right, that can have that versatility where, yeah, you can play linebacker or wide receiver, cornerback, whatever it is, but your value to the team ultimately is on special teams. So I think it's going to be really interesting how it plays out. I want Bernard Converse on the roster for sure. I think it's going to be interesting with Oliver. They might carry 6 defensive backs. And when you look at it with the 53, I could totally see Saleh carrying 24 defensive players.
Brandon, what do you got?
I mean, yeah, I wouldn't call it far-fetched, but it's like, once again, when it comes to this roster stuff, and to your point with the special teams too, it's all about like positional value, right? Because if you really think about it, I'd say the numbers on the offensive side, I don't think they're going to carry 3 quarterbacks, as you can have their emergency 3rd quarterback on the practice squad. So I think that's where you're seeing the Martinez Peasley battle commence. The running back position, I think they're keeping 3, maybe 4. I'm very interested to see how they manage that position compared to others. Wide receiver, I'd probably guess around 6. And then, other types of positions, are you going to keep 3 or 4 tight ends? And how does that balance out with offensive line? Because are you using one of those tight ends as more of a blocker, right? Are you keeping 10 offensive linemen, as the Jets have talked about previously, that they want to avoid, having to sign a Xavier Newman or a guy like that off free agency because they don't have another guy that can play the position? Flipping to the defensive side of the ball, how many defensive linemen do you want to keep? And then linebacker, safety. That's where the special teams, that's where the preseason performances are important, but it also comes down to coaching staff preference. We're not going to know until roster cutdowns happen, because everybody can make their predictions, and then the Jets could zig when everyone else thinks they're going to zag. It's just a very distinct combination of, the performances and, okay, who fits this scheme? Who do we like? Who do we think is going to develop? And that's where, bringing it back full circle, a guy like JBC, I think he sticks, and I don't even think his roster spot is in question because, like Connor said, they didn't let anyone else take him. They essentially stashed him last year. They obviously like what they saw. He was a drafted player, and now we're at a spot where he's flashing. He's doing really well, and you're seeing that developmental pipeline. Think the same thing like a Jamian Sherwood. Think the same thing like a Zaire Barnes. The Jets have these certain types of players they want to keep. So keeping that in mind, defensive line. Maybe it's a Michael Clemens because they think they can get the most out of him, or maybe it's an Eric Watts or a Tack McKinley. It's all these different combination of, okay, how does the coaching staff view them? How did they actually do? How do they contribute in more than one facet of the game? And then all of that will really come together to say, hey, we're keeping this amount here because, let's say, for example, we love what Isaiah Oliver brings on special teams. We're going to keep him over a Irvin Charles, or we're going to keep him over a Lance McCutcheon because we like our wide receiver room and we'd rather have the extra defensive back instead of the wide receiver. It's a very contrived way of saying that it depends, but it really is going to come down to these next 2 weeks and just how the coaching staff wants their specific roster to be constructed.
Well, also like it also depends on who gets cut too, right? Like that's a big factor. Like at the end of the camps, like certain veterans get cut, and that could add depth to certain positions that you think are very weak.
Yeah, you mentioned veterans getting cut there. I think, a lot of what has to do with, cut down day is obviously, it comes up August 27th. Obviously, one of the most important days around this summer. You have to make really tough decisions regarding this team's roster. And I think a lot of the Jets' thought process is going to be like, okay, we like this guy, but we think he's a guy we can possibly stash on the practice squad without a team going after him, and we can elevate him back to the 53-man roster, which NFL teams could do 3 times a year before having to sign him to a 53-man roster deal. And then you also have, like I mentioned, JBC, a guy who the Jets are all right. Maybe this guy's going to be inactive on game day. We really like him. We like the potential that he brings to the table. We think he might get grabbed by another team if we put him on the practice squad. We want to lock him up on this 53-man roster so we have him for the next year or two. So I think that's what a lot of the Jets' thought process is going to be like.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see where they go with certain. I agree. I think Saleh has proven himself, and Douglas to the same extent on the offensive side. Like I think there's going to be 9 to 10 offensive and defensive linemen. So there's going to be probably less than 4 linebackers, less than 4 like 4 running backs. Definitely not going to happen. 4 tight ends, like Brandyn. I don't think that's happening at all. I think it's going to come down to he likes the rotation. And Michael Clemens, you touched on that earlier. I know there was a hot button topic. I don't think he's getting cut whatsoever.
No.
His ability to stop the run is going to be very big on this defense. I know he's had a lot of terrible tape of plays that everyone remembers that's just like infamous. But so did JFM, if you remember. Like JFM had a lot of roughing the passer penalties in the last couple of years, and we're like, oh my God, why do you have to do this at the worst possible time you show up? And it's that same situation. And I think Michael Clemens, he's never going to be a star defensive end, but his ability, because he's 6'8" and like 300 pounds, he's going to be great against the run. He's very hard to block. Unless some veteran defensive end, lowers their price, that's a free agent that we're not talking about, or comes open, I don't see him not being on this team.
Brandyn, what do you got there?
With Clemens?
Yep.
I think it depends on the other guys behind him, because look, I get it. Oh yeah, the run stuffing and all that. His pass rush ceiling is as low as it could possibly be. I don't think there's much upside there. He's also already going to be 27 this season. Isn't much upside in general. I think if you see enough out of McKinley, enough out of Watts, enough out of Leonard Taylor, I really do think his roster spot is in jeopardy. And let's also remember that this is a guy that is a personal foul risk. He will commit penalties. He has started fights in practices. And look, I know that isn't the most conducive number to translate into games, but in a team that has been prided so much on discipline and consequences and basically being accountable this offseason, this might be a player that runs counter to that. And I think you could see that, if he still plays a bit hot-headed and still doesn't play at a level that is really susceptible to being on this defense, I think you could see the Jets get rid of him. And adding in the fact that with Hassan Reddick's status up in the air, the Jets need as much production as possible. Are they really going to rely on Michael Clemens, who, like I said, his run defense is not sky high. It's not amazing. It's fine. With no pass rush ceiling, are you relying on him as a starter? Don't know about that.
All right, Brandyn, sorry not to interrupt you, but I'm gonna call you out on this. Who are you getting? That's honestly, there probably is, but who are you gonna find that's gonna, at this point in time, late in this preseason, that's gonna be better than him? That's gonna fit the system.
I think if you get enough, I think if McKinley shows what he's showing, he's better than Clemens. Yeah. I think if Watts shows what he's showing, he's better than Clemens. It's not this bar of Michael Clemens. Clemens isn't this great defensive end. He really isn't. And
no,
he's average, right? He's not this player where it's like, oh, how are we ever going to replace Michael Clemens? I think it's relatively easy, and I think the Jets could do it very easily with the guys on their roster. It just depends on if they want to keep him or not.
See, like
Yeah.
I think it depends. I think just like Salah said it a million times, it's this defense is predicated on waves. It's not one player. So like Reddick would take this to a whole other level because he's that good, right? We talk about him, but like I think the defense is a scheme, and especially the defensive line. I don't think it really matters as much. I really don't think that position, Michael Clemens, I think he's viewed as just a run stuffing defensive end that's versatile, just like JFM was. You know, he doesn't produce near what JFM does, but they're hoping that his upside being 27 versus JFM at whatever he is 29, 30 would come into that's what I think this scheme is. You see it all the time. There's 3, 4, 5 different defensive ends that get opportunities at sacks. That's the scheme because Quinnen's there. They stunt JJ. They stunt all the defensive ends. Like when Lawson was relatively healthy, that's the scheme.
Yeah, you mentioned Clemens there. Obviously, the inconsistency in just 2 years in the league, I think that has been the biggest thing, which really has been jeopardizing his roster spot. You look in 2022 when he was a rookie, a big role. I believe it was offsides. Brandon, correct me if I'm wrong. In that game against the Giants, that I think what did that? It was definitely a big play in that game. I think it was on a punt that he got called offsides on, and then obviously you see him get ejected in that Dolphins game. Question becomes, like Brandon said, with an average player, are you going to want that much of hoopla, if you will, surrounding his possibility of making this roster and just this New York Jets team as a whole? But Nick, I really appreciate the call. You got any final thoughts?
Honestly, I'm looking forward to seeing tonight. I don't know if Braylon Allen's playing or which
I'll
of the
tell you
rookies
right
are playing.
now. Braylon Allen is playing. The only running back that's inactive is Brees Hall.
Okay, so yeah, I'm interested to see if Braylon Allen keeps up the yards per carry, like how he plays. McDonald is a big factor tonight. If he can show any consistency, I like Taylor. I really like Taylor at defensive tackle. I really want to see what he produces because I think he could be someone alongside Quinnen. You don't need a drafted product to produce, so that interests me. But and JBC, like we talked about, like I want to see, can he be consistent? If he shows tonight
Yeah,
anything like what week 1 was, then he's on the team to me.
absolutely. Nick, really appreciate the call. Enjoy the game tonight.
Guys.
Really appreciate it. Next up on the line, we have Johnny Boy joining the show. Johnny, how you doing today?
Transformation. Brandon, what's going on, man? Connor, what's going on, buddy? How you guys holding up?
Doing well.
Doing
How
well.
you doing?
Doing great, man. Love the content, first and foremost. It was awesome. The insight is great.
Thank you.
I have to say, though, with the Clemens piece of it, like, I understand it, right? But I love the enforcer role that he's playing. The role that, if somebody gives you crap, he's going to come out there and defend. He doesn't care if he's going to get in trouble or anything. I think that's needed. The last 2 years that you were talking about, Connor, last year he put on weight because he was asked to be a position that he's never really played.
Yeah.
So I hope that he does stay there. That's why I'm not so worried about the Hassan Reddick thing. Do I believe that Hassan Reddick would make the team better? Yes, I do think so. Right. But I also think that we're fine in what we have right now. And then that the players that we have are good. Like the rough stuff, the run stuffing piece of it, right? I think we have it in Fotu over there. And Fotu is somebody that's been really under the radar. But I say that to say this. I believe our coaching staff, when it comes to the defense side, I think that they really do well prepare every single week for what we're showing. And it'll be interesting to see this. I wanted to ask you guys that I was noticing that they played Ashton Davis in the Michael Carter role. And then I saw some of that. So it's interesting to see, because he's our Swift, our Swift Army knife. Like that dude, he's good. I'm not going to say he's amazing and all that, but I think he's good. And you're right, Brandon. I think that we're seeing JBC possibly be that Michael Carter role moving forward, because it's going to be some next year, which I'm not really worrying about next year, but we kind of talked about it. There's going to be some players that we're all going to be pissed off about, that they're going to be gone, unfortunately. So if we have them now, let them sit back, like you said, continue to keep learning that role and know what you guys have in that, and then kind of move forward from it. But tonight, for me, is seeing the other linebackers, the Surratts, seeing after that, because I know we're not seeing Sherwood play tonight, right? Of course, we're not going to say CJ or Quincy. I want to see those roles. Those are the roles that I want to see what we really have when it comes to depth. And then on the offense side, I've been saying this, and I think this might be a big hot take. I honestly think that Gibson or Brownlee are going to be the ones cut, and I'm leaning more towards Gibson being the one that's going to be cut, dude. So, just saying.
Yeah, Brandon, before I let you get into those positional battles there, Johnny, you have always not been so high on Gibson. I just wanted to pick your brain there. Obviously, I know you're a big Quarterly fan. What concerns you really with Gibson? What don't you like about him? Is it his size? Was it him struggling to return kicks? I see you nodding your head there. Is it the size that concerns you?
It's the size for me, and then it's the fumbling of the ball.
Okay.
All last year, every time he was back there, I was like, if this dude was to get popped, he's going to drop the ball. And we're about to be screaming, Now, I don't want you to think that I don't like Gibson. I do like Gibson. I just think that I haven't seen a Jets team be so stacked in such a long time that we're going to be getting rid of a lot of players that we're going to be upset about, and I truly believe that I think it's going to be Gibson. I think what Brandon was saying, we want players that could play multiple positions, right, to be able to go ahead and fill in these roster Swiss Army knives. And I don't know, man. I think Corley, that's his spot. He's going to take it over. I mean, last week you saw him and they used him 3 different places. I'm intrigued to see what's going to happen tonight. I mean, what's your guys' take on this? I know I'm spitting like really crazy stuff, but it's my gut feeling, I guess.
Yeah, Brandon, I'll let you start there on the positional battles, which Johnny got into a little earlier.
I think Gibson's on the team. He's not playing in this game. His roster spot is almost as safe as can be. He's going to be the starting returner, and I've liked what I've seen from him. He looks like improved in his route running, improved in his catching. He's going to be an asset on this team, especially when Corley isn't fully up to speed. And Corley's more of that gadget, a few plays here and there. And Gibson's really going to have that main slot role when he's on the field. Probably rotate with Lazard in and out of that spot when the Jets have Garrett and Mike Williams on the field together. Outside of that, though, I definitely agree. I'm interested to see how the linebackers look, whether it be a Chaz Surratt, whether it be a Zaire Barnes, players like that. These guys have been flying around in practice. I'm excited to see what they do in the game. And even more so than that, do they have anything in the coverage sense? I think for me also, wide out, can any of these guys pop? And look, I know we're talking about guys that are long shots to make the roster here, but can McCutcheon show something? Can Winstead show something? Can Brandon Smith build on what he did last week? Can Tyler Harrell rip off a big play? These are the types of things where, we're not talking necessarily about 53-man, but maybe we got a practice squad stash. And now the Jets are like, okay, maybe we can develop this guy. And next year, he challenges for that roster spot. Quarterback 3. How does Peasley and Martinez look? That's another practice squad potential. Even like some of the offensive line depth. It's like I said earlier in the show, you're really looking at very, very, very under the surface things. You're looking very in depth because these are the types of things that, it might not matter in week 1. It might not matter in week 4 or 5. You get to week 10 and let's say a position is hurt. If you have a guy that steps up now, maybe you're not in a position if you're the Jets that you feel as bad playing a backup center or a third string guy at linebacker because you have that roster depth. Those are the types of things you have to watch. Like, I'm not worried about Braylon Allen. I would obviously love to see him rip off another big run like he did last week. Same thing with Isaiah Davis. I'm not worried about JBC. I think he's going to have another good game.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of how do these other guys stand out and possibly push for either roster spots or practice squad spots.
Yeah, just one more thing before Johnny gets back into it. You mentioned Malachi Corley there, Brandon, kind of being a gadget guy. What do you think it really takes for Corley to take that next step and emerge as a starting slot receiver in this New York Jets offensive system? Do you think it's just experience, or what are some of the main things you're seeing with Corley right now where it's like, all right, I don't see this guy coming in right away into a big role? I agree with you. I just wanted to, pick your brain there and see what you think, what you see in him.
I think when it comes down to it, it's just this is what the Jets do with their rookies. This is just the thing they did. They did it with Garrett. They did it with Sauce. They did it with Jermaine. This is like, it feels like an organizational philosophy at this point. It has nothing to do with this talent. And it has more so to do with they're trying to get him up to speed. I just don't think, like, the start of week 1, he's going to be the full-time whatever wide receiver. He's going to be working with the first team offense. He's going to have his packages. They're going to use him. He's the type of player you got to use on this offense. He's too explosive and just as a matter of fact, is really good with the ball in his hands. But that's why you're seeing him get as many reps with Rodgers and Tyrod and Peasley as you are. That's why you're seeing them do the things they're doing with him, because look, it might not be at the start of the season, but by midway through the season, that's when he hits the ground running, or 4 weeks into the season, that's when he hits the ground running. That's why I think Gibson showing what he has is good too, because now that's how you build out a wide receiver room. You know what you have in Garrett. You know what you have in Mike Williams. You want to make sure that Lazard's doing more of the good instead of the bad. And if you have Gibson, now you're not forced to throw Corley into a situation that he's not fully ready for. You now have that bigger runway to really be like, hey, we can use him in the way we want to start out. And then by X date, he's going to be fully ready to go. And that's when our offense hits the highest gear.
Johnny, what do you got there?
Agreed 100% of what he just said, because they used him like that in the last game. He was put in different positions and he was all over the backfield. So, which was awesome. And for me, seeing quarterbacks that I could actually run this offense for me last week was amazing, even though it was, nothing insane or anything like that at all. But I did want to ask my last question, and I'll be off, because I know Brandon's been to a lot of the practices and been seeing this, and I think you as well, Connor, right? But we know tight end 1 is Conklin, tight end 2 is going to be Ruck, right? But after that, the Yeboah and Kuntz piece of it, for me, Yeboah's always been the practice hero, right? And then I saw, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I saw in Kuntz last week in that game is that he was actually blocking, where that was his biggest problem, as they said, and he looked really good blocking. Other than that really weird, reception that Malachi took and all that, right? I thought he had an okay game, but there's people out there saying because of that one play, he looked like crap and he was bad and all that. So I just wanted to get your guys' take on I'm a Kuntz guy. I went to ODU, so that's why that one hits home for me, right? But I just remember seeing him. He was a game changer. Like that dude would have 3 people on him, and he's just, Randy Moss out there, but just because he's so big and athletic. But what is your guys' take on that?
Brandon, I'll let you go first there.
I think the tight end room is going to be interesting, and I feel like it's one of the more underrated position groups on this team in terms of what they're going to do. Because, look, there's a reason they got rid of Nick Bawden, right? There's a possibility they can bring him back, but you kind of see the idea of what they want to do with Ruckert, and now it's like, okay, now you have the tight end, but now the tight end can serve also as like that sort of H-back lead block role that, it opens up more roster flexibility. Now you're not having to keep a roster spot for a strict fullback. And, I am in full agreement. I think it's Conklin and then Ruckert. And then the other guys on the team, Firkser is more of that blocking role. I think Kuntz has shown some flashes as a receiver. And as you mentioned, he doesn't look as lost when it comes to blocking. I think Yeboah, if I were to really categorize him, falls more into that blocking role, whereas Kuntz is more of the receiver role. But I think both of them have, they've done decent. Tight end it's a hard position unless you're getting a ton of targets to always fully stand out. And I think for those two guys, it's very important at a minimum for the practice squad, but also their chances on the 53 that they got to make some plays these next 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think right now, if you were asked me to make my pick for tight end 3, I'd say Yeboah, if I was being completely honest. Mainly because of what he's shown in terms of pass blocking. You mentioned Kuntz actually blocking last game. I think what Yeboah has shown though throughout these practices, keep in mind, these aren't fully hitting practices like the preseason games are. But what we've seen just on Twitter, everything so far from Yeboah, it seems that he's the favorite. And then also Firkser coming into the picture only hurts Kuntz. Personally, I think Kuntz will beat out Firkser. I don't think Firkser will even make the practice squad, but that just gives Kuntz even more competition. I look at Kuntz right now. I think he's a developmental project. I think he's a practice squad guy.
Yeah, dude. I don't know, man. I'm hoping, I'm rooting for him. I liked what I saw. I'm intrigued to see him again in this game, starting, see what he's gonna do, and I hope he continues to excel so he could be that guy. Brandyn, Connor, look, I appreciate you guys, man. Always awesome. Brandon's brain. Every time I see him, that's exactly what I think about, man. You guys are killing it. I could say this with everything inside of me right now is this is going to be an amazing season for us. I haven't seen them this stacked and I don't know how long. I feel like at this point, it's us nitpicking positions just to nitpick, right? Because I really don't see where we might be weak at, right? Because for every position, I could give you a rebuttal in regards to that position. You know what I mean? So like it's I don't know, man. I'm excited. I'm excited. I appreciate you guys, man. JETS, baby. Jets. Let's go.
Of course.
There we go, Johnny. Speak it into existence there. Have a great season. But right now, we are just 37 minutes away from kickoff in Charlotte, North Carolina. So it looks like we will wrap up here. But Brandyn, I really appreciate you joining me. You got any final thoughts?
Yeah, just really looking forward to seeing how, like I said for this entire show, how do the depth guys on the roster separate themselves? What do they do to stand out? Do you see some risers? Do you see some fallers? And, can guys that had great week ones of the preseason continue in week 2? It's going to be very fun to watch.
Absolutely. I will be back immediately after the game for a live post-game show with Gunny Gumby of New York Jets Situation Report. Brandyn, I really appreciate you joining me. Everyone, thank you guys for watching. And as always, JTS Jets.